ladies and gents, this is ML's like Team Spirit. Today I've got Chris Pearce back with me. Chris, welcome back.
I can't stay away. Thank you. It's good to see you again, JC.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for your support. Chris, you're my first guest and you're back all these months later. So thank you for participating. Chris, this time, last time we were speaking about machine learning and all these things. This time I'd like to talk about something different. So it says here on the screen that you're a chief data officer, and I'm trying to get leaders from the data industry to come and give us a bit of insight as to what their job is like. I don't know if everyone watching this would know this quote, but there was one that was like, data is the sexiest job of the 21st century. Do you remember that one?
I remember it well, yeah.
Sometimes yes.
Times.
Sometimes yes. Sometimes it's a bit different. So I sort of want to get into what you do on the job and I don't know, some of the challenges and so on and so forth. But seeing as we're taking a different approach this time, the management piece, could you introduce yourself for 60 seconds, like what you're doing and so on?
Yeah, chief data officer, as you said, a data scientist by history and trade. So I've come via probably a fairly unusual route, and I wear quite a few hats now. So I look after our enterprise data platform across the whole business, the infrastructure and the architecture that sits underneath that. I've got a team of data engineers, data scientists, a small analytics team, a data governance team, and a small team of AI engineers as well. So a pretty broad remit.
Good. Let's jump into your routine, Chris, because sexiest job of the 21st century and all that. I'd love for you to tell everybody what a chief data officer does in a typical week. So if you could use proportions, like roughly how much meeting time do you have? How much face-to-face time do you have? What else are you doing? What is the composition of this role for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say there's a nice routine, but there isn't often one that's as standardized as you might like. So look, I would definitely spend a lot of time with the executive team and sometimes the board, making sure that strategically we are aligned, that they are clear on what it is we are supporting in terms of initiatives, whether we're aligned with any new asks from up on high, that everybody's clear with the progress of that the value that it might be adding, certainly whether there's any incidents or not, that all needs to be reported up, and clear that we're managing our risk and regulatory requirements. So I'd say that's probably a good third of my time, and that's largely meetings based. I would say I probably spend 10 to 15% of the week talking across our supplier and partner network as well. So working with all of the companies and teams that support us in all of our various endeavors across our cloud platform and our data operations. That can be anything from figuring out funding or co-funding or investment opportunities. That could be anything around understanding the new functionality that might be coming out and figuring out whether that's relevant to us and how we might go around testing and trialing that. That could be going to them with challenges that we've got with their toolings and trying to figure out how we can overcome those, whether that's advice or working together. Could be all sorts of stuff. A third maybe with my team. So again, making sure that they're all happy, that they understand what their priorities are, working on making sure that the team is happy, it's working as it should, we're embedding the right culture, all that sort of people stuff. And then I'd say the remaining 20% is split between incident management. So of course, in a large company, things are breaking or bugs are appearing all the time. Sometimes there may be a crisis that you just have to jump on there and then and deal with. And that can happen at any point, right? And then probably the remainder of the time would then be around the sort of risk and regulatory and compliance side of things. So just making sure that from an admin side, we've got sufficient coverage and that we're staying up to date with keeping all of our processes and data in line with the requirements set by external parties and internally ourselves.
So it's a lot of communication here. I'm visualizing this calendar. We're triple booked from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something. Would this be kind of okay? Do you have any thinking time during the day, just out of interest?
Again, it varies. Again, I don't particularly schedule thinking time, although arguably I should. And I certainly don't have as much thinking time now as I used to when I was hands-on behind the keyboard as an IC. But there are times, certainly when we're sort of going into discovery on, for example, AI projects or big data science initiatives, I will get the chance to participate in those and, work with members of my team on the business who are infinitely cleverer than I am. But, I add to that, contribute to that, ideate on that, leverage some of the experience that I've got in the industry and in those endeavors. If I'm honest, a lot of my thinking time happens sort of outside of hours. I'm still geeky enough that I want to read, the latest academic paper on the newest LLM, for example. So, I do spend my own time, thinking about things, although again, probably not as much as I would like.
Good, thanks for that. And so, Chris, I've been pursuing you for this interview because the chief data officer role at eSure, you were the first person to take this position.
Yes.
You were previously senior director or head of department in data area, and they've elevated this and kind of pulled it out of wherever it used to be. So I'd love to get some reflections from you as to where did all this activity used to sit before you took that built that department. And I don't know, just reflections on differences, really. Like, is there any differences now? Some of those things stand alone as the data function compared to how they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, the second question's really interesting. I think how it came about is we did run the sort of what I would describe as a back end data team and the data science AI teams as two separate entities, although they did sit under the same umbrella, actually under the chief customer officer here at eSure, which is slightly unusual, but it works really well for us, especially given our focus on customer centricity. I think it just became apparent over time that the best way to create throughput and the cadence that we aspired to was to bring those two areas together, so that in effect you could have end-to-end capability to execute, and if that all sat under one head, there'd be less in the way in terms of blockers or dependencies or trying to manage two separate sets of backlogs to effectively do something that requires cross-functional teams to deploy. So it just sort of made sense. And I think in my case, I'd just been fortunate enough to build up a portfolio of credibility in the data science world, which is, of course, where I've spent 20 odd years, and demonstrated that, this is how we can effectively go from proof of concept through to something in production, empirically delivering value and evidence through data. That bringing that mindset into an engineering team, for example, would just help further cement the kind of thinking and ways of working that we're trying to really embrace and federate here. Has it been different? I mean, absolutely, right. The remit changes dramatically. When you've got a team of 60 odd, 70 odd people, you cannot be down in the detail in everything. You have to be really, really selective. It becomes about managing the data asset holistically, so you do start to care about costs because you do own a budget. You do have to think now strategically. You have to take a much bigger picture thinking. You have to take a much longer horizon to think forward over, and you have to be especially cognizant of all of the other priorities, some of which might be competing in the business, right? And how you pragmatically slot into that, right? So it becomes a lot about timing, and that's very difficult to facilitate lower down when you've got teams that might want to be using the latest algorithms to solve problems, but the jigsaw pieces might not align in such a way that you can fund that to drive that activity in such a way that it's going to solve the problem that needs to be solved in the here and now cost effectively. So it becomes much more of a juggling act, and of course, as a centralized data team, anyone running a team of that nature will know you are in constant demand from the wider business. So then you are into managing prioritization, competing initiatives, and how you keep your stakeholders on side and explain to them how and when you can support them, and then manage the fallout of that when there is some.
So you were saying there's a synergy when you bring kind of the data engineering groups and the analysts and data sciences together to deliver better solutions. It sounds like then you've teased the business and got them addicted to getting these holistic outputs and solutions and so on and so forth, right? Is that it? They see that things happen quicker and so on and so forth. But for you, it creates more management overhead. Is that right? To kind of try to prioritize these things, keep other people in check. I'm pondering here. The chief customer officer probably didn't used to get too involved in like, this project's a bit slow. Well, I don't understand all the nuances of the data division anyway. I just have to tell people it's happening or not happening. Um, is your perception that you are under more pressure because of what you've been able
Well,
to show?
yeah, yes. Little anecdote, maybe. I always remember my PhD supervisor saying to me, I remember it clear as day, that the more successful you are, the more is expected of you, but in a way that is a good thing, because it puts you in a position to continue to push yourself, and as long as you manage that in a way that you don't end up having a stroke, then that is challenging, and that's a good kind of challenge, especially in a world that's so versatile and changes so readily, right? You have to be willing to learn new things, adapt and relearn, very, very often, whether you're a leader or an individual contributor in data and tech, right? That's just the way the market is now. So, I mean, certainly under more pressure, from up top all the way down to people wanting access to this table for this reason. But I would rather be in a position where you've got too much demand, and the challenge is how can I serve that in a time efficient way, rather than having too little, in which case, to me, that would be an indicator that you're not really plugged into the business in a meaningful enough way. And if I'm honest, I've always been very tactical about, in data science, go for low hanging fruits, prove out the value. It might be simple to start with, show that revenue coming in such a way that it's ubiquitous to everybody, build up that reputation and that credibility, because ultimately that's what's going to drive your case for further investment, whether that's in tech, whether that's in people. It kind of has to be that way around from my experience, and often, lots of data engineering teams or data science teams don't necessarily understand the business very well. They're down in the weeds of the algorithm or the technology, but being able to bring everybody front of house to actually understand the problems they're responsible for solving and the part they have to play in driving those outcomes, I think is really important.
Let's stitch a few of these things together, Chris. So 30% of your time is spent dealing with executive colleagues on alignment and prioritization and so on and so forth. I just heard your data science background of start small, prove something and build. And I'm wondering if there's these like two polar opposites. So about all the demand side then. So like, AI is the most hottest thing in the entire planet right now. So I'm interested if you've got any insights as to the sorts of conversations that you have, because regular folk must believe that AI can make you walk on water, or so on and so forth. Achieve anything using AI, and then you're coming at it from this pragmatic standpoint. Can you give us some insights as to just like what these conversations kind of look like? How do you meet in the middle with the execs that want AI tomorrow, and then you're the guy that's done this for a job for a long time?
Yeah.
How do those conversations play out?
I think anybody that's worked in data for long enough will be familiar with the challenge of, if I give you this amount of money, how much am I going to get in return? Well, I don't know until I build the thing and start to test it. You've got this whole chicken and egg situation. I don't think that's changed throughout the course of history. It is true that as we go through various hype cycles, whether that's big data, cloud, machine learning, AI, You get these inflated senses of expectation. As you know, there's a lot of noise out there. It can be very difficult for non-practitioners to pick apart what's actually true versus what's embellished versus what's plain false. I see that as part of my role is, yes, there will be certain stakeholders that say, I want AI tomorrow. Why aren't you moving fast enough? But ultimately, part of the job is trying to explain, these are the business problems we are trying to solve. This is the toolkit we currently use or have at our disposal to do that. This is how that data process or the data life cycle to solve that problem looks like in your business right now. And drawing pictures helps in all of this, in getting to that sort of conceptual common level of understanding, and then being really clear on, you want a large language model or you want a machine learning model. This is the part of the process that this component slots into, and this is precisely what that component is doing. It's just returning a number, or it is returning some text. And why that is important is because downstream it will enable this team to do that, which means that process changes, or that operational thing is different. So it's about being able to sort of, take it out of its AI to, it is a tool in a much broader process that can be used to enhance part of it. That then makes it easier, in my experience, to explain that it's not just a throw it to a data scientist and a day later they've created a call to an API endpoint and ta-da, the magic happens. That means then that you can start to explain the cross-functional nature of the whole end-to-end process. So it might be engineering, it might be developers, it might be data scientists, it might be architects, it might be infosec, it might need risk and compliance oversight. It might need legal consultation. It needs the business SMEs and on the floor doing all these different things. It needs time to test, and then you can start explaining sort of the human efforts behind that to then more realistically set the expectations of what's actually involved to execute. Often, as you know, in the world of data, things done well typically take a lot longer than most people appreciate. And then it just finally becomes about trying to describe the upside of why taking the time needed to do that will drive value, being really clear on how you're going to evidence that, and then probably giving a few options about what would give if you did things a little bit quicker than the ideal amount of time it would take. And then you're turning a demand into, I can give you this optionality with this range of potential outcomes, but it's going to take this. All of that effort doesn't necessarily mean it ends up being understood, or it's understood on the first go. And quite often part of the job is trying it again, or trying it in a different way, or bringing back a revised version of of that story. But that is the way I try to broach and manage that sort of disparity in expectation and demand.
I love the question and I love the insight. Thanks, Chris, because I really feel, I just said this yesterday to somebody, we're being agent washed right now, collectively, in the business world. And really what we're being confronted with is everything from a statistical model to a metric tracker to things that were like Six Sigma, process control. They're all being agent washed as like,
Yeah.
here's something that's alive. It's really
Yeah.
just an analytical automation, which was what it always was. So it's very
It-
difficult for folks to get a sense of like, what is this really? So your example there of, here's the workflow, and you know it because you've done it for a long time, helping people understand we either have the tooling for it right now or we don't. In terms of the input, it's about there might be a data acquisition piece. We may not have the data to support what you just asked me today, and therefore something else needs to happen. And then, of course, all the resources. So you've shown your true colors, Chris. Sounds like you are an exec now, helping people understand all this. Chris, thanks for this. Let's get down to the last question. I wrote on my piece of paper, time machine, and it works like this. You have all this knowledge today as to how you do your job, and you took this job a year ago. Is there anything you can think of from your sort of personal side, personal growth, that you now see as super important to what you're doing that maybe you didn't fully appreciate, when you first started this, or have a, what have you developed? Is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming into it, I understood or appreciated the importance of it, but probably not as fully then as I do now. And I think I'd say two things for that. And it sounds very obvious. Making sure you've got a very clear data strategy, which is not a trivial endeavor. Ultimately, a data platform is there to serve or service all the needs of the entire business, right? So in that endeavor, you've got to really understand not just the technology landscape, how that fits together, and how data transits around and through it all, and then how you manage all of that from a governance, security, and operational perspective. But you've got to understand all the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve. What products are you trying to launch? How do you want to manage the claims life cycle? How do you want to interact with your customers? And then you've got to fit your data asset to all of those objectives, right? So it becomes you've got to be very commercially astute to build up that picture effectively, and to be able to manage the plumbing of all of that in such a way that you can meet the needs of the business, which again are continually changing as the weeks do. So I think having a very clear vision, and initially, even if it's not necessarily complete, a very clear approach to how your data asset is going to help the business objectives is something that I would advise anyone to jump on straight away. I think the second one is around budgeting and finance. Ultimately, it is not cheap to run data platforms, and when you have hundreds or thousands of colleagues onboarding into that, using that every day, there are all sorts of things that can go on in the weeds that can spike costs or create wastage or leakage. And not least, just being able to do analytics or data science or engineering comes with an underlying cost, right? So managing that is a challenge, but I think being really clear and transparent with the business on, this is what that landscape looks like. I am tracking it. These are initiatives I'm doing to mitigate and manage and bring all of that in line or down. And then using that as a way to sort of empower your team in the mindset of everything we do is designed to ultimately add value. So, understands the end to end of the business problems you're supporting, understand how we're going to measure and evidence the value of the initiatives that you drive and support, so that ultimately you can see what you are responsible for. And that can be really empowering if it's done in the right way. But making sure that you've got sort of full oversight of the nuances of all of that is something that, if you don't get on top of it quickly, can get very out of hand and unwieldy quite quickly as well.
Well, Chris, it sounds like the busiest job of the 21st century, having listened to you
I
describe it
don't
all.
think it's the sexiest.
Yeah, time will tell. But Chris, look, thanks for all your insights on this, and thanks for taking the time. Good news is we hit time on this, and I know I'm probably holding up from your next call. So thanks for all your insights on this topic, Chris. Ladies and gents, this is ML's Like Team Spirit.